Hey guys, welcome to Gen Z Codes. In this video, we're going to learn about flow control and the if statement. We learned about comparison and logical operators in the previous video and how they can be used to form logical expressions. So, the if statement checks a particular logical expression with a Boolean result. It executes different groups of Java statements depending on whether that expression is true or false. So here's the basic structure that we actually have, right? So I'm just going to make it as a comment. So we say if, then we have the expression over here, and we have this opening curly brace, after which we have a block of code, and then we put the closing curly brace. Then we have else, and we have code, and the closing curly brace, right? So basically what this does is that it says if a certain expression is true, then do this code. However, or else, if that code is false, if that expression is false, then do this code, right? So just to give you an analogy or kind of like an example as to how this would actually be in reality, right? So let's say your friend asked you, what do you want from the vending machine, right? And your first preference is a chocolate chip cookie. So you tell your friend that if there's a chocolate chip cookie, then get me that one. But you're not sure if there's a chocolate chip cookie, right? So you say, and your second preference is a bag of chips. Now you know for a fact that that bag of chips is there. So what you say is that if there's a chocolate chip cookie, get me a chocolate chip cookie. Else, get me a bag of chips, right? So that's kind of how this works, right? If something is true, then do this. Else, if it is not true, basically, then do that, right? So only and only if this expression over here is going to be true, then will this code happen. If this expression over here is false, then this code is going to happen, right? So let's say the expression is like something like 5 is equal to 2, right? In this case, this is false, which is why this would happen. But if it was, let's say, 2 is equal to 2, it would be true. So this code would happen. So only one of these is actually going to happen in this case, right? So let me actually show you an example as to how we could use this, right? So I'm going to use the scanner object over here. So I'm going to say java.util.scanner, right? And over here, I'm going to say scanner, my scanner is equal to new scanner. Right? So now let's actually, first of all, start by initializing some variables, declaring them, right? So I'm going to say int integer 1 is equal to, let's say, 4, right? And then I'm going to create another integer. I'm going to say integer 2. And over here, I'm going to assign it the value, right? And this is going to be through the user input. So I'm going to say my scanner dot next int, right? So it's going to ask me for an integer. Now, what I'm going to say is if integer 1 is equal to integer 2, right? Then what it's going to do is it's going to say, it's going to print yes, right? Else, it's going to say no, right? So just to explain this once again, right? So first what it does is that it's storing for an integer 1. Then it's asking the audience for it's asking the user for some input. It's asking it for an integer. Now, depending on what that integer is, it's going to say if your integer 1 is equal to integer 2, so if 4 is equal to whatever the user inputted, then say yes. However, or else, if that integer 1 is not equal to integer 2, so if 4 is not equal to the number that you have inputted, that the user has inputted, say no, right? So let's actually run this so that you can understand it a little bit better. So here I'm just going to input a value, let's say 5, right? And it says no, because 4 is not equal to 5, so it does the else code. However, over here, let's say 4, and it says yes. Why? Because 4 is now equal to 4, so this condition is true over here, which is why this code executes. But when we said 5, integer 1, which is 4, is not equal to 5, which is why this condition was false, which is why this code did not execute, but instead it was this one that did, right? And that's why we got no as it. Alright, so I hope you've understood this basic structure, because now we're actually going to be creating a program with it. But before we do, I just want to mention one thing. So this if structure can actually be modified to include an else if statement to consider multiple logical expressions. And actually, as we create the next program, we're actually going to be using the else if statement, and hopefully you'll understand that better as well. Alright, so let's start a new project now. So I'm going to call this ice cream. Alright, so let me explain to you exactly what this is going to do, right? So this project is going to ask the user, right? It's going to ask the audience, what is the temperature, right? Then depending on what that temperature is, it is going to set a price for the ice cream that we're selling, okay? So let's say the temperature is greater than 80 degrees. It's going to set the cost at $40. Else, if the temperature is greater than 90 degrees, it's going to set the cost at $50. But if it's not greater than 90, if it's not greater than 80, which basically means that if it's lesser than 80, lesser than or equal to 80, it's going to set the cost at $25. Alright, so the first thing that we have to do to make this, we have to import the scanner. Right? So we have to say import java.util.scanner. Right? Over here, we're going to construct it. So we're going to say scanner, my scanner, equal to new scanner, and system.in. Right? So now let's go ahead and initialize our variables. The first one that we have is temperature. Right? And the next one that we have is cost. We're only going to have like 2 variables for this one, which is temperature and cost, because it's a pretty simple project that we're going to do right now. Right, so what we have to do is we have to first ask for user input. So we have to say temperature is equal to myscanner.nextInt. Right, and over here we can add a prompt that says system.out.println, and we can say, what is the temperature, right? And then it gives you the space to input, and yeah, wait, we can add a new line over here just to make that good. All right, yeah, so it asks you what is the temperature, and then on the next line, it will ask you to input a value, right? Now, depending on this value, we're gonna say if the temperature is greater than 80, and we're also going to put another condition. So we're going to say, and temperature is lesser than or equal to 90. Then what it's going to do is it's going to say, it's going to set the cost to 40, right? So basically what this is, if the user inputs the temperature to be greater than 80, and like that value is also lesser than or equal to 90, then the cost will be set at $40, right? Now the next one that we have is else if. So we're going to say else if the temperature is greater than 90, right? Then what we wanted to say, we want to say the cost is equal to 50, right? So if the temperature is greater than 90 degrees, then increase the cost by $10, say that it's 50 degrees, right? And the last thing is else. So if it is not greater than 80 degrees, if it's not greater than 90 degrees, which essentially means that if it's lesser than or equal to 80 degrees, then you set the cost to a standard of $25, right? So I'm just going to add one last thing. So I'm just going to say system.out.println, and I'm going to say the cost is, and we're going to say cost. So this basically prints out the cost, right? I'm going to run it now so that you kind of understand how this exactly works, right? So ask, what is the temperature? I'm going to say, for now, I'm going to say like 79, right? And it says the cost is 25, right? Because here the first if condition that we have, the first expression, is evaluated to false, right? Because 79 is not greater than 80, and 79 is also not equal to 90. So here we already have one expression that's false, right? So even if this might be true, because we have the and over here, this entire thing would evaluate to false, which means that this code will not execute. The next line that we have is temperature is greater than 90. 79 is definitely not greater than 90. So this code will also not execute. Now the last one that we have is else. Now because neither of these have happened, this is the one that's going to take place, which is why it says the cost is 25. Right? Let's try it again. And this time, let's say, I don't know, about 83, right? And it says the cost is 40, because the first one itself is true. The temperature, which is 83, is greater than 80, and it is also lesser than or equal to 90, which is why this cost happens. Now let's try the last one, which is, let's say, maybe, I don't know, about 100, right? And it says the cost is 50, because over here, this condition is not met, right? It says temperature should be lesser than or equal to 90 for this to happen. So 100 is definitely not lesser than or equal to 90, which is why it skips this and this does not execute. But over here, the only condition, the only expression that we have is that the temperature should be greater than 90, and that is true. So we get the cost is 50, right? So that's just kind of how this works out. Alright, so now I want to talk to you about loops. In Java, you often need blocks of codes to repeat over and over again. For example, if I wanted to ask you to guess a number, you would guess a random number, but the odds are that it probably isn't correct. So until you get the correct answer, I want the program to keep asking you to guess a certain number. So to make this code, I would use a loop. So first let's talk about the while loop. You can make a block of code execute over and over again with a while loop. The code in a while loop will be executed as long as the while statement's condition is true. In the code, a while loop will always consist of the while keyword, a condition, a curly brace, and an indented block of code on the next line. So let's actually try an example, right? So I'm going to create a variable first of all. I'm going to call this number, right? And I'm just going to say 10. Here I'm going to write while my number is greater than, let's say, 3, or actually let's just put it as 0, I'm going to say system.out.println, and I'm going to say gen c codes, right? And then I'm going to say number is equal to number minus 1. Alright, so let me explain this to you. First of all, I initialized a variable. I said that it is 10, right? The number is equal to 10. Now over here, in this while loop, the condition is, or the expression that we have is numbers greater than 0. So the condition that has to be true is that the number must be greater than 0. In this case, because the number over here is 10, that means that 10 should be greater than 0, which it is. So this entire thing would be true, right, over here? So then it says system.out.println gen z codes. So because this is true, it will print out gen z codes. Now the next line that we have is number is equal to number minus 1. So let me kind of break this down for you. Let's say we just had this, right? We just had this and this did not exist, right? Let's just say that that did not exist. What's going to happen is that it's forever going to say gen z codes for an infinite amount of times. Why? Because, as I mentioned, this while loop's condition, well, the while loop would actually execute for as long as this condition is true. Now, considering that 10 will always be greater than 0, this will be executed always. Forever, it would just go on and on and on. Right? But we don't want that to happen. We just want it to happen like maybe a certain number of times. So we put this. What this says is that the number, so the number variable, is now going to store a value that is 1 less than its old value, right? So previously it was 10. Now it's going to be 10 minus 1, which is 9. So the number now is equal to 9. So after this line, after this while loop is done for the first time, this number is now equal to 9. So while it would be number, which is 9, is greater than 0. Now 9 is still greater than 0. So this would happen once again. But now the next time that it comes to this, number would be equal to 9. So it would be number is equal to number, which would be 9 minus 1. So it would be number is equal to 8, which means that over here it would be 8 is greater than 0. Now 8 is still greater than 0, so this would still continue to happen. Now, eventually, it would reach a point where your number is equal to 0. How? Because there would be a point where your number is equal to 1, and then you do 1 minus 1, which gives you 0. In that case, your number is greater than 0. This clause that you have, the condition, it would prove to be false. It would now be false, which would mean that the while loop would stop. The while loop would now terminate, right? So let's run this so that you kind of get an example of how this works, right? So this prints out Gen Z codes about 10 times, right? Now, the first time, let's actually go over this. So the first time is when your number is equal to 10, right? The second time is when the number is now equal to 9. This is when number is equal to 8, then 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and lastly, you have 1, right? It's when your number is equal to 1. Because 1 minus 1 is 0. So after that, you cannot possibly have any more Gen Z codes be printed, because this code will not be executed then. Alright, so I hope you kind of understood what that is. Now let's move on to the do/while loop. So aforementioned, if the logical expression used by a while loop is false, the first time the loop is encountered, the code block in the while loop will not be executed, right? If this was, let's say, 11, right? If this was 11, then this would never happen. It would never print out Gen Z codes. Why? Because this is completely false. So this wouldn't even happen once. So this might be okay, that this while loop's code is not even executed once. In certain scenarios, it might be okay. But in a lot of scenarios, it's not okay that it's not even printed out once. So there is another type of loop that will be executed at least once. Now this is called a do/while loop structure. It contains the keyword do, followed by an opening curly brace, the code that is to be executed, and the closing curly brace, and a while statement with the expression and a semicolon. So let me actually put this in a comment over here, right? So it would be do, and then the curly brace, and you'd have whatever code you need to enter over here with the closing curly brace. After this, you have while, and you'd have your expression over here, right? That's what you'd have. And you just have the semicolon after this. So notice that over here, unlike the while loop, there's a semicolon at the end of the while statement. Now the code block in the braces repeats as long as the Boolean valued expression over here is true. But you should know that over here, the code is executed at least once. So we'll actually experiment with this a little later and actually make a project with this. But now let's learn about break statements. What a break statement is that it's essentially a shortcut to getting the program execution to break out of a do loops clause early. So it's just simply written like this, right? You just have something like break, right? That's exactly how you would write it down. Alright, so what I've just gone and done is I've actually created this other project rather, and it basically uses the do and while loops. So I'll explain it to you now. So basically what this project does is it keeps asking you for the first letter of the alphabet, and until and unless you say something that is not A, so unless you say a letter that is not A, it'll keep asking you the same question over and over again. Right? So the very first statement over here that we've added is import java.util.scanner. Why? Because we need to use user input for this project. So I've gone and added that. Then we've constructed that scanner object over here, so that's what that means. Then we've defined a variable, we've declared a variable rather, and we've called it letter. right? Then we start the do loop over here, and it says, what is the first letter of the alphabet, right? And it's going to keep asking you that. It's going to print it at least once, right? And it's going to keep asking you that until and unless the clause over here is proven to be false, right? So this entire part will happen once. Then it'll look to this condition, right? So if after the first time it asks you what is the first letter of the alphabet, if you say B or C or D or any letter that is not A, it will basically what it will do is it will break out of that loop, right? But if you say A, it'll keep asking you for the first letter of the alphabet. It'll keep asking you, and it'll just go on and on and on, right? Until you say something else. Now, if you can see over here, I've said letter dot equals ignore case. So I've said ignore the case. So even if it's a small a, capital A, doesn't matter. As long as the person says A, it is to say the wrong answer for now, right? So let's see. So it asks me, what is the first letter of the alphabet? I say H, right? And it breaks. It comes out of the loop. But let's see over here, if I say A, it keeps asking me, right? I keep saying A, right? It'll keep asking me again and again because the clause has not been proven to be false yet. So let's say I say I over here, then I break the loop, right? And it comes out of it and it just ends. That's kind of how the do-while loops function. I now want to show you an example with the while loop. It's actually kind of a different one, and how we can use the break. The break method in this sense, right? So I can say while, and let's say, I would say while 5 is equal to 5, right? And we can just go ahead and delete that for now. So I can say while 5 is equal to 5, do this, right? Now, of course, 5 is always going to be equal to 5, which means that this would always happen. Now, of course, like I showed you previously, we could add the like 5 is equal to 5 plus 1 or whatever like that, and we could probably change it in some way. But over here, it's like 5 is equal to 5, which means that it's pretty rigid. This means that it's always going to happen. So it's going to keep asking you for the first letter of the alphabet, regardless of whether you say A, B, C, D, or E, or any other letter. It's going to keep asking you for the letter of the alphabet. So in this case, what you can do is you can say, if you want to like break the loop early, you can say if, let's say letter equals, ignore case this time we say again, and we say, parentheses, we can say A, right? Then we just say break. Right? So let's actually run this and let's see how this works, right? So it's going to ask me what is the first letter of the alphabet. I'll say B. I say C, D, E. And it'll keep asking me, right? Because I haven't said anything yet, right? Now let's say I say A. It will break. So basically it'll come out of this loop. That's what this break function does, is it just brings it out of the loop. So the last thing we're going to learn is the continue statement. It's similar to the break statement, except instead of completely leaving the loop, it just tells the computer to skip statements in the loop that have not been executed yet and immediately return to the beginning of the loop. In a do loop, this means returning back to the do part, whereas in a while loop, this means returning to the while statement. So for example, in the code that we just created, if we replace the break statement with a continue, and let's say we change the condition to something else where we were talking about whether or not the letter is equal to A, right? That was the main expression, that was the main condition that we had set. And then at the end, let's say we had, after the if statement that we had added another line. Then after that continue statement is given, if that if statement's condition is proven to be true, then the continue statement will happen, which will take it back to the beginning of the while loop. Now, this is exactly what happens after the end of a while statement as well. But let's say there's a lot of other code after that continue statement that you really don't want to execute. Then you can just add the continue statement in that part, That way it doesn't go through the rest of the code until and unless it goes and rechecks the code at the beginning. I'm not going to show you an example for that right now, but because I think it's a pretty long video already, so I'm just going to leave you at this, right? So, well, that's it for this video. In the next one, we'll create a guess the number program. Happy coding!